It's upgrade time, folks. Ryzen 3rd Gen RRU. Stay seated, folks. This is going to be a good one. Roll that intro. Hello RageQuitters, my name is TerminatorUK and welcome to our Ryzen 3rd Gen RRU. So you might be asking, what the heck is an RRU? Well, it's a term that we've coined for a real rig upgrade. Do you get it? RRU? Anyway, so what is a real rig upgrade? Well, as the name suggests, it's actually a real rig that we use. This is actually my partner's rig, and we're going to upgrade it, so that's why it is a real rig upgrade, not too complex after all. So what is it in real terms? Well, a lot of hardware sites and reviews you'll see will have the highest end gear inside their kit, and in this particular demonstration we're going to be going from a Intel i5 3570K clocked to 4 GHz up to a brand new AMD Ryzen 5 3600. So I've done a lot of research into this particular upgrade, and the rig is going to be primarily for gaming, as you'd expect from our site. However, mulling over all the options, I think at the moment the one of the best options to go for in terms of price performance is the Ryzen 5 3600 rather than the 3600X, which is more money for very, very similar performance. The reason being, although if you're looking for pure gaming, probably getting a i5 9600K and clocking it to 5 GHz, if you can get that far, is probably the better option, but it's a bit of a one-trick pony, particularly in 2019. The way things were going, we see more and more games. I think one of the benchmarks, it was Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I think someone's going to correct me if I'm wrong on that one, is using more and more threads these days, and I think that that's going to be the trend going forwards. We're seeing a wonderful competition between Intel and AMD again. In fact, the AMD fanboys might say it's like the glory Athlon 64 days all over again, but it's wonderful to see AMD back in the fight. And in the consumer space, we're seeing more and more cores that were reserved only a few years back to your high-end Intel Extreme X products for near on, like £1,000 or something ridiculous like that. And now we're seeing 6 cores, 12 threads in a £180 processor. That is pretty phenomenal. And in terms of performance and cost benefit, I don't think you can beat that at all. Well, hopefully today we're going to prove that point. So let's get back to the real topic. So this is a real world upgrade. So we won't have the absolute best GPU in the rig like a 2080 Ti to remove the GPU bottleneck. We will be working with what we've got. And what have we got today? So we have the Ryzen 5 3600. That's going to be the core of our build. Now, if you've done your research, these won't be clocking to absolute mammoth numbers. From what I see, I'm expecting to get a 4.2 GHz overclock on all cores from this. The CPU includes a stock cooler. There was actually meant to be a Corsair 280mm. Let me get the code right. I think it's an L115i, if I'm correct. Yeah, I might correct that later, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. That was meant to be ready, but I'm still waiting on Amazon to deliver it, which is a bit annoying. Hopefully it might be ready for later on in this build review to include it. But at the moment we're going to try and build the system using the stock cooler. Okay, so that's the processor. In terms of the motherboard, again, done quite a lot of research. Now, just before we go on to the motherboard, the case behind us is a Fantex Evolve, I think it is, ATX case. So it's a really nice tempered glass and aluminium chassis, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's really nice in terms of space, but because it's only as in the space it consumes is not very big, because it's only a micro ATX case, it does limit the motherboards particularly, and I was very surprised about this, with AMD motherboards seem to favour full ATX cases. Finding a micro ATX form factor was quite difficult. Well, actually, let's put some rationale between that. To find a decent M-ATX motherboard is quite difficult. So I've done, as you expect, quite a bit of research into this one. There are a number of reviews around regarding this particular motherboard, the MSI B450M Mortar motherboard. So this is a previous generation, so it's not using the latest, is it X540 motherboards? I hope I got that right. So it's the generation before that, and these aren't the premium motherboards, they're like the rank down. And I heard that the B500, whatever series it's going to be, won't be until the first quarter next year, so it's going to be a bit of a wait if you think that that's going to come out soon. Having said that, there's quite a lot of reviews. One of the guys, which I can't remember his name, hopefully we'll be able to cite this reference a bit later, does breakdowns of motherboards, and this particular one, he broke down the VRM power delivery, and even though this is a 4+2 phase, so basically four power phases for the CPU and another 2 for the memory. Some of your higher end ATX boards you'll see like 8+2 or 10+2 phases. It's something that I've learned quite a long time ago, and it's just been reinforced today, that a phase in one motherboard doesn't necessarily mean the same sort of quality in a different motherboard. So this is 4 phases but 4 very good phases, and as we'll be seeing a bit later when we do the unboxing, the size of the heatsink over the VRMs is substantial. So I'm hoping that even though we don't need it today with a 6-core Ryzen processor, you know that there's the 3900X out at the moment that's got 12 cores. The more cores that you're going to be putting into it, the more power you need and the more strain on the VRMs. So I'm hoping by making a decision for strong VRMs will help with this particular platform. Another reason for going with the Ryzen build, conversely, was the lifespan of the platform, hopefully. With AM4 it seems to have a much better lifespan than the most Intel sockets. So I'm hoping that down the line it'll just be a case that we'll be able to plop a new Ryzen chip into the board and make use of AM4. Now, having said that though, I had heard that AMD was only committed to supporting the AM4 platform up to the end of 2020, so I might have missed the boat in that regard, but you know, sort of hedging my bets that there may be a bit more lifespan in this board towards the end of its life. Okay, so that's the motherboard, and that is the processor. The next is the memory. Now this is where it starts getting to be a real rig upgrade. So most people go out and they buy a kit of RAM. So I've actually I've purchased a 32 gig Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro. So I think this RAM looks awesome, and being Corsair, pretty much trust the brand's going to be good. And we're not going to use that in this build, so that is going in my primary rig. Sorry, Amania, you're not going to get that one. So that one's out. But from my rig, we have got 2 sticks, 2 8 gig sticks of the original Vengeance RGB RAM. Now there is some rationale behind this, rather than just being a tight arse and taking the best RAM for myself. And that is that this particular RAM came from a 32 gig pack and was rated for 3 megahertz. Yeah, it's got a lot of threes there. Slightly higher clocked than the other pack of RAM. So whilst there isn't that much room for overclocking the CPU itself, it is important to note with Ryzen CPUs that they are intrinsically linked to the speed of the RAM that you're going to put in the system. By that I mean that depending on the speed that your RAM is running at, you're going to get a situation where the performance may be, particularly between or multi-threaded applications, may be affected by your memory speed. And the reason for this, affected by the memory speed more than an Intel board, the reason for this is the memory speed is linked to AMD's Infinity Fabric, which is inside the Ryzen processor, and the faster the RAM up to a certain point, the better. So I think there was a slide from AMD that quoted that the sweet spot was 3,733 megahertz. Before, that's like on a 1-to-1 ratio, and then when you go above that, you start having to use you have to start using different ratios, like a 2-to-1 ratio of the RAM speed to the processor, which doesn't really help. So that's the sweet spot. But if you look at the prices for RAM above the 3200 megahertz, it starts going up exponentially, and that kind of RAM, sort of 3600 and 3733, if you can find that, it's hard to find and very expensive. So I'm hoping that with the slightly faster RAM than the other pack that I bought, we can play around with the memory overclock settings and therefore get a bit of a boost out of that. So that's going to be a bit of exploratory work. Okay, so that is the memory out of the way. Well, what have we got next? So the last couple of things for this build, I've got a great deal on a Sound Blaster X Pro Gaming sound card. My partner doesn't use any decent headphones at all. She just uses a pair of wireless Corsair Voids. Look quite cool, but I don't think they're very good, so this is absolutely useless to her. That one's going in my rig. So I don't even know why I put that in this review actually. It's just lols really. So last but not least, we have got a Corsair LL140 RGB fan pack. So the LL stand is basically for the dual light loop. So there's a loop in the centre and a loop around the outside, which is all programmable RGB. These look absolutely cool and they are pretty quiet. Now I've actually got two fans in this already. My rig doesn't have any of these fans or controller, so I'm going to be pinching one of these fans and the controller to put it in my rig, and the rest is going to go into Amanda's build. So yeah, that is pretty much it. I'm hoping that the additional fan will help the temperature situation. I've done a lot of benchmarks which will be shown throughout this video, and essentially what we're trying to see is whether any games are CPU bottlenecked and we'll see any significant improvement. The graphics card inside this rig at the moment is a GTX 1080, so it isn't the absolute latest, and we do a lot of benchmarks at 1440p, so I don't expect a massive improvement, but you know, this is going to be experimentation, and kind of be surprised if it does improve it. So yeah, so that's basically the graphics card that we're going to be using with that. But what we were seeing is towards the end of the benchmark, particularly with stressful modern applications, something like Tom Clancy's The Division 2, I was seeing temperatures on the GPU get to 78 degrees and temperatures on the CPU getting to 68 degrees, which isn't ideal by any stretch of imagination. And actually inside this build, if we open it up a second, we can actually see that the amount of space that's inside this rig is very, very limited. You can also probably see a lot of dust. Yeah, it is a real rig upgrade. And yeah, that's not going to be helping the thermals. I'm particularly bothered about this card being so close to this particular cooler. I'm trying to remember the name of this cooler. It's the Thermalright Macho, I think it is. Great name, absolutely great name. It's so macho that you need a man screwdriver. Look at the length of that to actually undo it. So one of the screws in this is right in the centre of the fan there, and that's why it's applied like a big screwdriver. So I've had that for quite a long time. It's a bit of a beast of an air cooler, and hopefully when the water cooler arrives, that will reduce the amount of space that's being used inside, and hopefully we can get better airflow. Okay, I think that's enough for the intro. I've rambled on as ages. So the next part's going to be the actual build, so that's going to be a time lapse, and with the time lapse we're going to show some benchmarks results as well to keep you entertained during the build. See you on the next portion. Welcome back to the next part of our video review. We're going on the build time-lapse section and benchmarks. You can see me building the system in the background. This is slightly out of sequence because since we recorded, you can see that we've actually whipped the stock cooler off in the screenshots behind, and we've actually installed the Corsair Hydro H115i Pro cooler. Is the cooler that we installed in the end when it finally arrived from Amazon. So we have been able to include these in the last minute in the benchmarks, which is good. Moving on to our first game, we've got Tom Clancy's Division 2 at 1080p. We're seeing some tangible increase there in frame rate, nearly 20 frames a second, so we're definitely GPU bound even on the GTX 1080, so that was a decent improvement. Moving on to the 1440p results, we don't really see very much improvements there, 1 frame a second even when overclocked, but we'll see later on with the heat and generally with the system, the reduction in heat that the cooler gives made a much quieter system, so it's not really represented on the graphs there. Moving on to Ashes of the Singularity, 1080p, we're seeing some really decent improvements there. Again, this is one of the games that likes a lot of threads and benefits from it greatly, so we're seeing really good improvement over the i5 system there, going from the 4 cores to the 6 cores with 12 logical threads on the Ryzen chip. Again, we're seeing similar improvement at 1440p, making it tangibly smoother overall, so a decent improvement there. Moving on to our next benchmark, we've got Rainbow Six 1080p. We're not actually seeing many gains here, so we were mainly GPU bound even on the i5 system. The main takeaway here is that we got a decent improvement on the minimum frame rate. Moving on to the 1440p result now, we can see that it's a similar sort of situation, that we're mainly GPU bound. We've got some weird figures going on with the i5 with quite low minimum frame rate, but very much higher maximum frame rate. Tended to be a bit of an anomaly in this particular benchmark. Moving on to Grid 2, an older game, we can definitely see at 1080p some really decent CPU scaling there. You've got nearly a nearly 50% improvement on the average frame rate, so you can see how much the i5 system was holding it back. And again, similar at 1440p, not quite such a big improvement, but definitely tangible increases and decent increases when we've been overclocking both the memory and the CPU on all cores to 4.2 gigahertz. Moving on to CSGO, so I've thrown this in here as purely just like a CPU benchmark. We see some massive improvements here, like nearly a 50% gain in frame rate. So I mean, all of these are incredibly playable. So you're talking about, you know, just ridiculous frame rates here, but you could, this is quite a good one. And again, showing even at 1440p that the older i5 3750K was actually holding the system back. So it's good just to throw that one in there, just purely to see the how the system was CPU constrained. Going on to our next benchmark, we've got Total War Warhammer. This is another game that really likes lots of cores. We see a decent improvement here, nearly 40 frames a second. And more negative scaling going on there actually when overclocked. So in this particular game it didn't actually like that very much. Again, we see nearly a 20% frame improvement at 1440p. So showing once again that even on not the latest and greatest graphics card, we do get some improvements when we swap out the processor. GTA 5 again is a game that likes a lot of cores. We're seeing some really decent improvements there. I was really stunned to see that the average frame rate was nearly a 50% improvement over the i5 system, so some really decent improvements in that regard. We've got GTA 5 at 1440p. Again, we're seeing some not quite such a massive increase, but some decent scaling going up. Some slight improvements with the overclock, but as you see with most of these things, there isn't that much more headroom in the processor. Moving on, so heat is a great takeaway. I love this benchmark here. So with the stock cooler, we're basically matching the Thermalright Macho's performance there, which I thought was pretty awesome. But then going to the Corsair H150i, we see some really decent improvements in terms of the heat. Specifically, the CPU temperature has gone down by a good 20 degrees, but the other takeaway here is because of the heat taken away by the cooler from the chassis and the additional cooling fans. We've actually seen a 5-degree drop in the GPU temperature, which is helping enormously on the system, and some of those overclocked benchmarks you're seeing is definitely benefiting from an improved boost clock as a result. Okay, that just about wraps up this section of the review. We'll move on to the conclusion. Well, there we go, folks. An hour and a half in real time on our Ryzen build is complete. And what beauty she looks like. I was actually really surprised with the outcome of this. Not completely planned. I wanted it to be black, but it's a really nice grey and black sort of monochrome finish. Yes, I know the red SATA cables ruined the build. So there's one or two elements, and there were mistakes made during the build. So I definitely add in some braided cable extenders, that will reduce the amount of clutter, make it look a bit better. We'll have black SATA cables eventually in the build. There's definitely some work to do with the cable management at the back. I can't actually get the rear door shut, but that's for another time. But overall, what a cool build, yeah. Yeah, as I say, there were some mistakes. One of the mistakes was like a real man, I didn't read the instruction manual. The mount on the CPU cooler isn't actually square; it's a rectangle, and I had to actually align it correctly. I had it round the wrong way of the AMD symbol at the top, and I couldn't get the holes lined up. And I was thinking, oh, I've got the wrong cooler and stuff. But yeah, silly me. That wasn't. Well, I haven't got it the right orientation, so make sure you check the orientation when you put it in. Also put it upright when I hadn't done all of the motherboard screws. So yeah, definitely one or two mistakes on the way. Yeah, as I said at the start, RageQuitters cannot endorse this is the as the proper method to install your new Ryzen system. Please take extreme caution. Can't be held responsible for any damages or breakages as a result of you building the system after watching this video. Okay, I'll wrap this up. I hope you enjoyed all of the benchmarks and the comparisons. I just will say one last thing on the on just the general build quality, I guess. I was just really impressed by everything that came out of the pack. The motherboard from MSI is absolutely phenomenal. You can see it absolutely so nicely built, really good quality. Just down to little things like the motherboard standoff screws have little silver, what do you call it, pellets really around the edge, so when you screw it in it doesn't sort of crack the PCB, so extra strengthening there. Very good quality motherboard, and so impressed by the process by AMD. It's probably one of the best kind of out of the box experiences I've had for a long time. With Intel, it's so minimal with just the processor essentially, and just some instruction manuals, and these horrible old, almost have nightmares over those old Intel stock coolers. These horrible like spidery things, and the stupid they used to have the like almost like push fit plastic barbs that went in, and you screwed in and you never know whether they were in position. Horrible. This is so much better. The screws on the outside here are proper metal screws, and you know that you rotate with a screwdriver. None of this plastic crap at all. And the mounting solution was a real decent plate underneath it, and the two bits came together really well. The fan itself is really solid. Just looks very well built, and the braided cable here that comes off it, you know, like a stock cooler with a braided cable, marvellous. Just really kind of like proper 21st century. So even though we still haven't had the water cooler, hasn't arrived, that's going to have to come in at a later date. Well, for this part of the review anyway, the stock cooler looks phenomenal. So at least we've got a different set of results, and hopefully by the time you've got to this part of the video, we've got the results of both the stock cooler and the water cooler, so you can see the difference between the two. We won't give it an award because it's not really a review as such. Actually, no, go on, we'll give it an award. I've got to give it the RageQuitters Legendary Award. Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal. I was so pleased with the build quality alone. I'm sure the results will also show that the performance has been outstanding too, but just on build quality and these components alone, couldn't recommend this MSI board and the Ryzen 5 3600 enough really. So thank you very much for watching our video build review. I really hope you enjoyed this format, and yeah, it's probably too long as always, but you know, devil's in the detail. We like long reviews. Hope you enjoyed it too. My name's been TerminatorUK. Thank you for watching.